this means living in this country.
This is about U.S.
Yes. And if I lived in another country, I might feel differently about the hierarchical versus egalitarian.
Well, this is research that is very much about U.S. society, right? They're not claiming that this is applicable, right? This is sort of research-based grid where they have found that survey after survey that these four quadrants and these two axes predict people's views on a number of other issues in this country, right? But they're not claiming it extends to other countries. So yeah. Okay. Other thoughts, questions, or ideas about it? Yes.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I noticed at the bottom it says source culture and graph. Source culture and identity protected cognition explaining the white male effect and misperception. Which is interesting. But I think, I feel like I am very egalitarian or more communitarian, but I think that's more my value than the reality in some ways.
And that's another thing about this research is that they're, first of all, they're not saying that these are kind of baskets that are an entire human being spends their entire life in one quadrant. Right? We are pushed in different directions by different forces in society. And we may actually, in response to different issues, we may shift. Our values may shift. Right? So, but what this is a kind of sort of research-based, sort of systematic kind of prediction. And let me show you what it predicts. So turn to figure 2. This is the amazing thing. So if you look at figure 2, this is what the research is showing. Very, very strong correlation between your cultural worldview, that's what they call it. They call it quadrants or different cultural worldviews, and what you perceive as a high-risk societal issue and what you perceive as a low-risk societal issue. So basically what they're finding is that it's like these cultural worldviews act like built-in cognitive filters. That they predispose us to see some things as risky and some things as entirely not risky. So if we look at the grid again, right, it's like, so communitarian egalitarians, it's as if they are wearing filters, right, glasses that, if they are confronted with messages or information that are claiming that gun control is a risk to society, they're going to filter that out. People with this worldview are predisposed to see gun control as low risk to society.
What's nanotechnology? What do you mean by that?
Good question. As far as I know, nanotechnology is this like micro technology that, kind of like they're putting like surveillance technology in shampoo. I mean, I don't actually know. I think it's very sinister, right? Yeah. And that's no surprise.
It's also like drug delivery.
Is it really?
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit better what nanotechnology is?
It's like creating functional units at a very, very small size that can act as a group effect in any sort of circumstance. It could be in a body or...
Yeah, so little tiny devices that can deliver drugs or tinker with genetic structure. See, and what I want to say about that is not only I don't know very much about it, right?
But you're already against it.
But I'm already against it. And that's cultural cognition, right? This is my worldview. We knew that coming in, right? And I have not really been listening to those advertisements that say nanotechnology is a great thing and it can make the whole world a better place. What I'm inclined to be suspicious about. Okay, so let's go over here, right? So the way this works is, yeah,
sure. Seems like some of this is about a knee-jerk reaction.
Sorry, I missed
a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, you don't know much about it, but you know you're against.
Right, that's a form, that kind of knee-jerk reaction is like biased searching. It's like biased assimilation. You could almost like come up with a fancy name for it. Right? Knee-jerk reaction is a kind of, it's just a more informal name for the way we filter out messages that don't fit with our basic worldview. And so, you know, if we go to the polar opposite quadrant,
Maria?
we see, yeah.
Like with nanotechnology, since we don't really know what it is, we can only assume it must include certain things. So one thing I thought of was like cybersecurity and, you know, all that intense information gathering. Whether or not it really is part of it, I don't know, but my imagination takes me there because it's not one of the things on your list. But it is a societal problem right now.
Yeah, so I can't speak to that. I don't know enough. Let me actually bring us back to climate change, because that's kind of, you know, that's my focus. So what I want to sort of emphasize here is the polarization, is the stark way in which these worldviews predispose us to see the exact same things as risky and not risky. So whereas down here, right, communitarian egalitarians they're receptive to messages and information that say, look, the world is warming. When that information crosses our screens, right, or when we hear someone talking about it, we're predisposed to let it in. Someone with a hierarchist, individualist orientation is predisposed to filter those messages out, to be dismissive of them, to set them aside, and you know, and in other ways too, to seek out actively information that challenges those messages. Right? So why would hierarchical individualists tend to be dismissive and skeptical of environmental risks? Why? What are they threatening about? Yes.
I think from a faith perspective, a lot of people think that God just wouldn't put us in that kind of mess. I mean, that's a hierarchical.
It's true that someone with a hierarchical orientation may see society as organized by tradition and religion and map sort of religious kind of norms and structures on, you know, kind of comfortably onto political organization. This graph is mostly about sort of your kind of political orientation in the broader sense, not in the sense of are you Democrat or Republican, but in the sense of your fundamental ideology, your fundamental vision for how society should be organized. So it doesn't speak so much to religion. So a hierarchical individualist, right, is someone who is invested in traditional forms of status, right? That like, yeah, there's people with more power in society, and they should have that power, and that is right and appropriate. And they're hierarchical in that sense, but they're individualist in the sense that they are suspicious and resentful of anything that impinges on the autonomy of the individual. And they think that individuals, you know, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And that society isn't responsible for the well-being of people who don't do well. That's their individual responsibility. And no one needs to feel like we as a society need to bail them out. But that's the kind of perspective here. And so, so my question was, just to unpack this a little bit more, is why does that worldview predispose folks to be dismissive of environmental risks like climate change? And I mean, the answer is that you got to think like, what is it that's being threatened, right? What do environmental risks call for?
Change.
Well,
Discipline.
social action, they call for cooperative action on the social level,
They
right?
call for regulation.
Yeah.
They call for regulation on corporations. And that's what the hierarchical individualist is protected by. Right? Because hierarchical individualists they favor commerce and industry. They see commerce and industry as one of the proper and appropriate ways that the world is organized. And they don't want restrictions.
Because it puts choice and power in the hands of individuals. I mean,
That's right.
at least
exactly. That's part of it, right? Is
right.
that like that's how you pull yourself up through your bootstraps,
Mhm.
right? Is by, you know, kind of making your way in the world of commerce and industry. That's part of it. And then the other part of it is that, it's the free market and free enterprise, right? So environmental issues, messages that, like, oh wow, there's, environmental degradation left and right. Well, the filter works to keep those messages from even entering. And so I have a friend who is very concerned about environmental issues. She's an activist. She has written a book about orcas. And she's also very aware of climate change. And she just shared with me that she was out walking her dog. And she lives in Idaho, and she was thinking about, wow, it's April, and I am sweating bullets. It's so hot. And that led her to think about how, it's getting worse. And what is the future going to be like? And what kind of world are we leaving our children? Why? Because climate change appears in her world as a high-risk issue. It's on her radar. And so she's predisposed to hear messages that come in that cohere with that. Someone with a hierarchy, I'm choosing the most opposed sort of quadrant, is predisposed to enjoy the weather. Feel like this is a great warm day. It's not even on their radar. The issue does not even appear as a high-risk issue. Instead, what they've been collecting are all the messages that are out there that are dismissing the issue, that are helping people actively construct a worldview that says this is not a problem. So do you see how this works? Right, so down here, right, we might be resentful of commerce and industry because they lead to unjust social structures. And so we might welcome that environment, we might welcome regulation to prevent environmental harm, right? And here we might have people who are invested in, keeping industry free of any kind of outside government interference, right? Because that is an impediment to free enterprise. Right? And so if we're up here, we're inherently predisposed to filter out messages that challenge or clash with that worldview. I want to show you one more thing before I ask you and to tackle this and to try to work with this and apply it to issues that you care about. So turn now to figure 3. Figure 3 on page 4. And this is kind of the last twist. I'm bringing in maybe the strongest highlights of this research. There are many, many different sort of angles that these researchers take to try to show the problem and the nature of the phenomenon. But this is one of the most worrisome. So you remember that I said that the problem, whether it's climate change or on other polarized issues, is that we all believe that they are, let's just say it, they're just stupid. Or more politely, we all believe that they are ignorant or science illiterate, the most polite way of putting it. Right? What's the problem? The problem is that all those non-believers or deniers are science illiterate. A lot of people believe that. Right? We could take polls in, big environmentalist action groups, and we could just ask people, do you think that's what's going on? Well, if that were true, we could formulate a thesis and then test it, and that's what these researchers did. They call the thesis the science comprehension thesis, and here in figure 3, right, you can see SCT. So the science comprehension thesis basically says that if the problem is that people who don't believe in climate change don't believe it because they are ignorant of the science, then what can we predict? Then as science comprehension goes up, polarization will diminish, right? People will agree as they are better able to process the scientific information. We're going to see increasing agreement, increasing levels of consensus. Does that make sense? Do you see how the science comprehension thesis works? Okay, well, what happens? The opposite happens. The opposite happens. This is the discouraging part, right? Is that what we do instead is we're just better if you kind of filter out in your survey methods, you filter out people who aren't very comfortable with scientific reasoning, and you just look at people who are, right? And who, you know, have equal levels of education and skill, and they can process slowly and carefully the way science kind of demands. And you look at those people, right? And your expectation is, well, when it comes to an issue where there's massive scientific consensus like climate change, then what we're going to see is agreement, and what we see is the opposite. We see even more polarization, and that's what these diagrams show. So on the left, you have the SCT prediction, right, that egalitarian communitarians, if the question is how much risk do you believe that climate change poses to human health, safety, or prosperity, then the ECs, as they get more scientifically literate, right, as we look at people who are, you know, really fairly good over here at dealing with scientific information, right, they were concerned to begin with, and they're still concerned. They're slightly more concerned. But the hierarchical individualists, if this thesis were true, they should also become very concerned, and the opposite happens. They are even less concerned, right? Because we are adept at using so this is a piece of a set of studies where it's not, so what they've discovered is it's not just people with this worldview, it's all of us are prone to this effect, that in fact our education, right, just makes us better at skewing the evidence to fit our fundamental worldview. It doesn't make us more open-minded, it doesn't predispose us to consensus.
Maria,
Yes, question, Harry.
was there some action in between? Or, I don't really understand the measurement. I mean, you know, to say, well, we'll pick the people with the same level of education, but was anything done to present to the people who were skeptical information that might change their mind? Or
No, this is just about just sort of filtering out folks who don't do very well on science literacy measures, right? Let's set them aside and let's just look at the people.
Other than that, there was no
exactly.
change.
What we find is that in the group of people who should be all processing the information and coming to the same conclusion, they're really not. They're even more divided than in that larger pool. So turn to page 5. I want to, Barbara.
I have a question about that. This is coming from like my statistics background. That those aren't all the same things. Like, and I'm guessing that the people that are in that quadrant that we're all in would look at climate change poses to you, how much risk do you believe it poses to human health? That might be the main thing in our mind, whereas the other side, their thing might be that it would affect prosperity. You know, human health and prosperity don't necessarily.
Oh, I see. So you're objecting to
You know what I mean?
the
Like
way the question.
if you broke them all out separately, what would those look like? Because this might be like what's called interaction.
That's an interesting
like
question.
This went this way, this went this way, so they all went.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know what you're talking about, issues
Yeah.
of constructing survey questions that load the question and have 3 different
And you
variables.
have to choose. Like, I don't think it would necessarily.
Yeah, so that's something I haven't looked at, but now I'll look at it. Yes, Bruce.
I think part of the answer to that is that the hierarchical individualists, the idea here is that their worldview, just like all the rest of us, their worldview is so strong that it blocks them from seeing climate change as a risk. So the 2 things are tied. You know, that question, you're right, the question is kind of different from the other graph we looked at, but admitting that climate change is a risk threatens their worldview.
Right.
And so they just kind of like they filter it, or they're thinking that it's blocked.
But I agree with Barbara. I mean, I think I'm trained as a social scientist, and I feel like some of this is so overgeneralized, you know, and that's the nature of social science. In terms of this idea, I really think that that people are going to have different concerns about human health, safety, or prosperity, and they're going to, depending on the information, and so that's how they're going to filter it. Or the same thing with these quadrants, like how egalitarian, communitarian, people who see climate change and nanotechnology as high risk, it isn't that necessarily they're super free market. I mean, I feel like it's easy to just say everybody's gonna be like this, who's in the individualists. They're all gonna feel the same way about all these things. And the
Okay,
same-
let me clarify something here. The way that they have done this is by, first of all, kind of sort of locating people in these quadrants. So what is a worldview? And then the real outcome of the research is that it's predictive. Right? So it's that we see a powerful predictive correlation. So all you need to know is what someone's worldview is, right? And once you've pegged them, then and if you've separately asked them about their views on nanotechnology and climate change and gun control, turns out there's a very strong match. So that's what this research is about, and that's why it's getting so much attention, is because these studies are repeated and repeated and repeated, and the prediction holds. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just, that's sort of an average, in terms of prediction, it's sort of an average, it's sort of overall, and there's a lot of people that don't. Well, I mean, I know what you're saying. I don't know, I just feel like, well, go ahead. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. All right, so turn to page 5, key lessons from the research. What I want to do is turn this over to you guys. So I invite you to be curious about this research. This is research that challenges many of our most basic assumptions about how to communicate and how to be advocates. Right? So you know the cartoon where the fish are like underwater and one of them says like something like the water is nice today and the other one says what water, right? And the idea is that like they don't even notice the water because they're in it, right? And that for them it's like invisible. Well, the message of this research, if I understand it correctly, is that we all live inside our cultural bubbles where we take our vision of how society to be organized to be like, kind of obvious and natural. And what we're much less aware of is the way in which the messages that we rely on and the information that we rely on and the language we rely on to try to convince others, right? But we're much less aware of the way that operates as a kind of negative trigger for them. Right? So we speak from inside our worldview, and we try to persuade others who don't share it. And we don't appreciate enough how in their worldview, the thing that we take as obviously dangerous, climate change, doesn't even pose an issue. It's not a problem. And where did they get that view? They got it from the same way we did. They got it from listening to trusted experts. Right, so we're not climate scientists. What are we doing instead? We're listening to trusted experts. Well, so are they. And they have years and years of accumulated messages that they've allowed in to their cultural bubble. And that when we speak out of our worldview, right, assuming that they see the world the same way we do, and that certain things should obviously loom large as concerns, well, maybe we're dead wrong. And those very things don't even appear as issues of concern. And the very opposite, right, that we may be talking to people who are, it's like stepping through the looking glass to go into their world. So that I invite you to explore the question of what would it be like to communicate about climate change and social justice issues in a way that acknowledges that. So here are some, I gotta tell you, these researchers are very reluctant to issue prescriptions, right? And this is not about, they're really trying to say like, there are no magic words. And there are no like PR messages that will make climate change, penetrate into the cultural bubbles of people who are predisposed to block it. There are no, magic words here. And so this is not about PR messaging, it's not about spin. It's about like actually trying to think, how can we communicate about this issue, climate change, but also social justice issues more broadly? How can we communicate across worldviews? Because, I think, let me ask you this. How many of you have social justice issues that you care about? Just put up your hand. How many of you would like to be effective advocates for those issues? So, how many of you would be satisfied with only being effective advocates for people who already agree with you? Right? Like, that's not going to get us anywhere. What we need is to communicate outside of the choir. We need to communicate across cultural worldviews. And it turns out that's hard, because once we do that, we're talking to people who have been filtering in all the wrong messages from our perspective, right? And when we meet them, we're talking to people who look at us and they think, you're one of them, right? You're one of those people. In fact, they have the same research focuses on the way people are, kind of predisposed to answer the question, answer questions about climate change and evolution. And that, they're constructing these beautiful studies to demonstrate that people will answer questions about climate change and evolution. They'll do a very bad job on tests that are asking them about their knowledge of either climate change or evolution. They'll seem to know nothing. But if you change the question and you say, according to evolutionary scientists, suddenly their scores go up. Or if you change the question, according to climate scientists, they can answer those questions. They know a lot more than you would have thought. Why? What's going on there? What's going on is that when you say, well, according to climate scientists, right, what is the major sort of greenhouse gas? Right? That gives them permission to show what they know. Whereas if you don't ask them the question worded in precisely that way, if you just ask them, what is the most important greenhouse gas, they feel threatened in their cultural identity, in their worldview, by the question itself. And they experience the question as basically asking them, what kind of person are you? And they know the answer to that. I am not one of those people who believes in climate change. Those are those people. I do not identify with that group, and I refuse to answer this question because I feel threatened by this question. So at the point we're doing that all over the place. And ultimately the lesson is that in environmental circles, we may be messaging in ways that ultimately undermine and polarize the environment. Yes?
I went last weekend and listened to a Republican former congressman from South Carolina.
Bob Inglis.
That's his name. And it was interesting, he actually got voted out because he was concerned about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about a lot of the things you're talking about in terms of this individual hierarchical. But he also talked about how this language of abundance versus language of scarcity, and that so much of the left or so much of the climate change, people who are, speaking about how serious is and so on, is about, oh my God, we're running out of, fossil fuels and we can't do this, and so that, as opposed to he was arguing that it needs to be a language of abundance, of, oh look, we get so much more energy if we went to this clean energy, and we'd live a better life and more abundant, that kind of thing. And that, so even in terms of the language used and so on, it was interesting.
That's right. If you're interested, so two things are coming up. On Monday, Citizens Climate Lobby is watching his presentation and discussing it, and I'm going to try to be there. And then I am doing a 3-hour workshop going into much greater depth into this research with the Colorado Renewable Energy Society to look at exactly those kinds of things. That's you can't easily map that into this very rigorous research, but you can loosely speaking make a connection, right? Like that's sort of the idea. The idea is that maybe your worldview predisposes you to be concerned about resources running out, and maybe if you're talking to someone whose worldview is premised on the idea that there's plenty and we can make more, right? Technology will save us. Industry will save us, right? That message is going to fall flat. Okay, so yes.
Is there an age differential in this too? At what point are people now more malleable?
That they're not looking at that. That's not something that they have even touched.
pre-socialization, like 6-year-olds in number.
Luna, don't worry.
So I don't know. Look at, may I suggest something? On page 5, you see I've got key lessons from the research, and then I've got questions to guide us. How can we repair polarized communication environments? So I want to make an invitation now for us to work in small groups to consider this first question. What does it look like to communicate about climate change and social justice in a way that affirms rather than threatens the worldviews of those who do not share your perspective? That's the challenge. That's not easy, right? Like, part of you kind of doesn't want to even talk to them. But that's why I asked you, like, how many of you are satisfied with just speaking to the choir on issues that matter to you? So this is my invitation. In small groups, let's say groups of 4 to 6, no more than 6, choose. So actually, let me slow down. I want you to work with real life experiences. I want you to see if you can create a scenario together, drawing on your real life experiences that illustrates either what I'm calling a cultural cognition impasse or a cultural cognition breakthrough. This is harder, okay? So let me illustrate cultural cognition impasse with Bruce's help. Okay, so this is a real life experience, right? Okay, you have to help me remember how it went. So I missed a step in my invitation earlier. I wanted you guys to map yourselves onto the grid, and then I wanted you to think of someone in your real life who is the opposite.
That's not hard.
Yeah, right. So can you summon those people up now? Think of those people, right? Someone who has either the opposite or strongly different cultural worldview from you. So for me, it's my father-in-law. So I'm going to share with you a scene that actually took place over Christmas break. Over breakfast, we were staying with Bruce's parents, and we were having breakfast, and I was behind the counter fixing myself a bowl of cereal, and Bruce's father, who I love dearly and very fond of, was reading the newspaper. And how did it go? He said something.
Well, I think there was a report of a shooting, and normally he's pretty close-lipped, but for some reason he delivered the line that I think we've all heard, like if everyone had a gun, or if more people had guns with them, then this kind of thing.
This wouldn't have happened. And so Bruce kind of looks at me right now, and trying not to drop the milk, on the floor. And I could not stop myself. I was trying, but I couldn't. And I came up to the counter and I said, "Oh, please." But I said something like, "Well, but the problem is, what if it's the other way around? Right? And what if instead the presence of an armed bystander puts other people in danger?" And I think I read a story about that just the other day. Because that's a perfect illustration of cultural cognition, right? So I did read a story about that just the other day. And why did that stand out to me? Because I have biased assimilation. Because my cultural worldview predisposes me to filter stories that show that, armed bystanders blow other people away and make things worse, right? There are stories on both sides, but I haven't read the other ones. The ones I notice are these. And he's coming from the opposite worldview. So that's my scenario. Now, can you guys think about the people you know and share stories with each other? Yeah.
I feel like if you even try to go into this, if the person that you are attempting to speak with knows that you're a they, you're not going to be open to anything you have to say.
Okay, that's a beautiful place to start, because I think, put up your hand if you feel something like that is kind of potentially true, right? How could you even start? Right?
They look at you and they know you're a they, and as soon as you open your mouth to try to say something, their defenses go up. This is my personal experience, and for real life demonstrations, sadly, it's my own parents feel completely different than me, and so it's they know I'm going to say something that they don't agree with as soon as I try to say something that's not. I'm trying to be confrontational.
So I wanted to do this in small groups, but looking at the clock, why don't we? Can we try to make a little scenario? Can you tell us a little bit more about? Just put us in this situation, right? You don't have to take us deep into it, but what does it sound like, and what is it about?
You pretty much. It was Christmas, and I was visiting them, and there was some shooting and we were talking about gun laws. It was like practically the exact same thing.
And what do you say? And what did they say? Can you get any of the?
I mentioned, so I do research, so I mentioned how Australia, when they had a mass shooting, it took them a year and a half or whatever, but they got rid of guns completely. And you look at their mass shooting and even gun deaths, and it goes down exponentially. You know, it's just incredible.
Okay, so you tried to
And
say.
so I
all that.
tried to
How'd
say,
that
you
go?
know, like, look, here's a country. I'm demonstrating a country that's actually done this. And they wouldn't, you know, they just couldn't hear it. And it was me telling them what they did.
Okay, so that's the impact.
I can
Yeah.
say the other side of that.
Okay, let's hear what
Well,
are they?
but I have evidence that there's a town in this country where they have a requirement that everybody has to have a gun in their home. And they have to know how to use it, and they have to be willing to shoot whoever breaks in, and that's the most peaceful town in the country. No injuries from guns. There's evidence to support that statement.
Excellent. Okay, are you gonna build off
Well, I'm gonna refute
what you
that.
said? Okay,
Well,
hang on.
I mean, not refute it, but I
Hang on,
mean,
don't go there yet. Don't
Okay.
go there just yet. What I'd like to do is actually try to remember what it's like in real life before we carry the argument one step further, right? So are you with me, right? Like, this is a real situation.
I mean,
Your parents maybe didn't say that quite exactly.
No, not at all.
But
we
could
both
they have?
have evidence.
What did your parents say?
Something similar to your father-in-law, that if people had guns, they could protect themselves and then these mass shootings wouldn't occur.
And they would probably be happy to read
Oh, yeah.
the story that Libby was saying. Okay, so let's freeze that situation. Okay, and now let's imagine that is happening here, right? And we're looking in. We're seeing that drama play out. So now think about this research and think about what this research is saying. What this research is saying is that if you want people to listen, you have to appeal to what they care about. And not necessarily just like, the idea is not like be manipulative. The idea is not like say magic words that will force them to agree. The goal here is let's try to improve a disastrous communication space where people don't even start talking, where we're all frozen, right? Not even able to go into it at all because the reactions are so strong and the polarization is so strong. So how can we improve on that? And so the lesson is, if you want to even improve on that, if we want to get in a position where there is some dialogue, some discourse, you got to find a way to appeal to that other person's worldview. So what would it look like to do that? How could you go down that road even a little bit, even one step down that road is it Laura? I can't.
Lindsay.
Lindsay, in Lindsay's scenario or maybe in a different scenario that you have.
well, you could appeal to this, yours is basically every individual, if they're armed, could protect themselves. But what if there are some individuals that don't want to have a gun? Since so many more gun deaths happen because of suicide than actual armed violence. It's like
But
a
David, whose mouth are you putting this in? Lindsay's?
So I'm saying like the other person can say, well, if you're sort of arguing that if every individual is armed, it will decrease the amount of violence. But what if there are individuals that don't want to own a gun?
Can I ask you a question?
Isn't that?
In saying this, do you see this as part of kind of like winning an argument? This is how you might win an argument? Or how do
No,
you
it's
see
to convince the other person that, like, even at an individual level, it's not. I would think they would be able to recognize that some individuals don't want to own a gun.
Okay, you would think that there would be, okay, let's take that back to your
Okay.
parents. Did you understand what he's saying? What would your
Yeah, I
parents
guess
say?
again, my parents don't have a gun and they don't want one. So it's not like they're like fighting for their own gun
Okay.
rights. They're just sick of society shooting each other, you know, and so they don't know what the answer is. So I don't know if I have to argue with them about, you know, I think they believe in the right, like, you can choose if you want to have a gun or not like mandatory, you have
Okay.
to have a gun. So I don't know if that would work with them, but I mean, maybe that's a different person, maybe you do
Right.
have to convince some people.
So what is the sticking point then between you and them?
Well, I mean, I guess I would put it out there. I don't want guns in my country. Like, I might move to Australia just to not have guns. You know, I'm very much against guns. I'm down here in the bottom corner. You know, like I feel very strongly.
Where gun
about
control brings safety.
Yes.
And for
And
other
so that, like, hearing what you're trying to say, open communication. My parents want safety too. That is what everyone wants,
Okay,
right? You want to
so-
walk down the street and feel safe.
So isn't that a place to start? Isn't that a piece of common ground? So what would that sound like? I just kind of, we don't have to keep building on the scenario with your parents, but it's out there. So what would it sound like to realize, oh wow, we actually have a shared value, and then to try to take the conversation a little further. Like, so I'm basically thinking, our conversations don't even get off the ground. We're only talking to ourselves. We're only talking to people who share our worldview. What would it be like to actually try? And it's risky. It makes, gives me palpitations to think about it, right? Like the conversation with my father-in-law, I stopped right there. I thought, I was just like, I don't even know what to do. So I did, yeah.
I'm just thinking that as far as the gun control issue goes, I think part of the dynamic that happens is that the us versus them. It's like not only is it they think it, but it can be seen as it's their fault, right? It's like for my father,
Right.
his point of view might be it's like all those sort of the roles. We don't let us do the right thing.
Right.
And if they got out of the way, we could fix the problem, right? And then on the other side, it's the same, right? It's the reverse, but it's the same sort of reasoning of if those right-wing conservative nut jobs got out of the way and we had better gun control laws, then that would solve the problems. So just right at the starting gate, not only is it a difference of opinion, but there's blame. There's they're creating the problem. And then just another thought was that part of what I heard you guys saying was sort of more information. And the research, at least this research says that more information doesn't really help. In fact, in some cases, it increases polarization. And so I was wondering about, would it be possible to say, just have a conversation about how do you feel when you read one of those stories about shooting? And start.
And the thing you said too, like you said, they're sick of kind of people blowing each other away. So you share that too. Is that a route to communication? And would the conversation? Do you think the conversation would unfold differently if you took those angles?
I definitely appreciate everything you're saying. I really like this idea of communication. I just think there's such a polarization that as soon as someone already knows, maybe it takes somebody that you don't know, and you can go into it not knowing their worldview. But my parents know my worldview, and as soon as that topic comes up, it's like the wall comes up too. And so, yes, maybe asking them how they feel when they read that article could open a different line of communication, and we could talk about being sad that the world's in this place. But as soon as then maybe policy or you try to move that next step, I guess that's why I say my first statement from the very beginning was, unless the other side, them, is also open to maybe have a discussion, it seems like that wall just is always going to be there.
And then we'll never get off the ground, and we'll just
Right.
continue the way we are. So I invite you to get curious about this phenomenon if it's real, right? You can dig into the research yourself and look at these studies. But if there is something here, can we get curious about how it works, and can we get curious about maybe shifting some of it? And so here's a suggestion that comes from another researcher, a hero of mine named George Marshall. I'm going to talk about him in the April 30th workshop. By the way, these are events that I am organizing and presentations that I'm giving that are coming up in the near future. So I'm going to give you this idea that comes from a researcher who works very closely with some of this same material. And basically it's, can we plant seeds? So like, pull back on the goal. So the goal is definitely not about winning an argument. It's not about, really, with your parents, right? It's not going to be about changing their minds or changing their worldview. But what if the goal was to plant seeds in the people in our world? There's very interesting research that shows that we have enormous amount of influence within our social spheres. When people are asked, who do you trust when it comes to climate change? It turns out they trust friends and family more than they trust Pope Francis. So I've said this before, you have more influence in your social circle than Pope Francis. Because each one of us, who is the world's most tweeted, most, like he says something and it reverberates around the planet, right? He's a very influential man. Whether or not you share his orientation, right? He's a guy who people listen to. But research shows that in our own social sphere, we have way more influence because we're connected with people and they're already predisposed. We are trusted messengers to our friends and family, the people that we are connected to. So the invitation is to, in George Marshall's words, is to think of the challenge as planting seeds and leaving them there to maybe germinate later, right? As opposed to what? Silence. That's the real enemy. When it comes to climate change, there is a kind of blanket of silence. We accept that this is so polarized and that we're going to get pushback and that people are just going to be mad or uncomfortable that we just don't even talk about it. And that may be true for other social justice issues, right? You have a feeling that people don't want to hear your, tired stories about issues that are terrible and that need to be changed. And so you clam up. And so this is kind of a path that maybe suggests that a route, a strategy for opening up, taking some steps, starts with recognizing that people are coming from very different worldviews and that their worldviews predispose them to literally see the world in a completely different way. And that the landscape of risk and possible harm that we see coming from within our worldview may be the opposite of what they see. And that dialogue, conversation, seeds, would maybe have to come from appealing to shared values or to their values. And
Is any research being done on the role of the media in shaping worldview? Or do you think it's that people of a certain worldview gravitate toward a certain media? And as I'm asking the questions, I'm kind of troubled because there's so little choice in media worldview. You have to be.
Well, it's amazing. I was listening to a speaker at the Heartland Institute. The Heartland Institute where they specialize in cranking out some of the most, sort of well-funded disinformation on all kinds of issues, but climate change in particular. And I was astonished to hear the speaker denouncing the liberal media and talking about how, right? And we're like, what liberal media, right? Like what we see is a media that is, loaded with all kinds of filters that, they don't even allow discourse about some of the issues that we take most seriously. And they see the opposite. They see a media and they also see the professorship that way. So yeah, that's outside the scope of this research, and I know it's out there. I don't know much about it. Can we even see the media in an unbiased way? That's the point. Is which media are you talking about, and you may see it differently depending on what worldview you're coming from. Thank you, guys.
There's also the issue of science too. The godless scientist is holding to artificial intelligence and so on. Is that in terms of even when you're talking about research, if you're talking to somebody about the research shows this or whatever, there's some who say that's godless science, godless scientist.
What I have been surprised by, coming from this area, is evidence that Americans broadly have a lot of respect for science. And that that we kind of think, we're in climate change, right? Environmentalists tend to think we're the science camp, and it's the deniers that are the anti-science camp. So they are in the process of trying to shut that down and trying to show with evidence that's not true. People across the board, across the political spectrum, have a lot of respect for science. What is happening is that they just disagree on what the science says. And they disagree on who counts as a scientific expert. So they respect science, right? They believe that science has made the world a better place. They believe that science helps us, that it's necessary, that we should trust it. But then they're radically polarized on my scientific experts versus your scientific experts. And the minute you try to lay some of your science on them, what you get is, oh, that's just your bias. You think that person is an expert. You're inclined to believe Al Gore, right? But that just shows the whole problem.
My quadrant says that all the scientists agree.
And this is another shocking. I'm going to talk about this on the 30th, but just a teaser. This blew me away. This group is also trying to show with evidence that messages that say that are actually making things worse. Right, so what are the messages that say that? Basically, this is climate advocates saying there is consensus, there is scientific consensus about climate change. Did you not hear me? 97%, and the messages are big, they're in bold print. And the assumption is that people just haven't heard that yet. And that once they hear it, they will understand. Well, they're trying to show that, in fact, people have heard it, and this is what they are getting from that. You're just insulting them, right? Because that's the sort of hidden kind of message of what part of 97% consensus don't you get? You're an idiot if you don't accept this, right? So the reaction is just, I'm going to dismiss that story. That's a story that liberal environmentalists tell, and it's a false story. And I'm going to go find a scientific expert that shows that it's a false story. And they're out there. So to answer your question earlier, I think you asked this question, Margie. It's kind of both. It's people actively looking to be to have their biases reinforced, and it's industries, trying to provide that material, and it's that collaboration that's got us in such a bad place.
Do I believe in climate change just because I'm in that quadrant?
Well,
It's not really true.
let me just, isn't that interesting? You start to ask yourself this question. I think I'm going to try to channel these guys for a minute. I don't know if this is what they would actually say, but I think this is what they might say. They might say, what's true is that you are heavily predisposed by your upbringing and by the people who have influenced you, or whatever it was that made you who you are. Let's put it that, maybe that's better. The forces that made you who you are predisposed you to take seriously a whole category of risk. And so you were very open to the information, the messages that said this is the biggest one of all. So you were like a sitting duck for that. It's not a simple causal relationship, like you believe in it because you have that worldview, but that worldview is in you because of a whole bunch of influences that created a predisposition, and we all have it. Rebecca, before I take any more questions, I have to ask you, is it okay to take more questions?
The people are interested in having the conversation as long as you are available.
Yeah.
These 4 quadrants.
Yeah.
What proportion of the population falls into each one? Do they have that?
Maybe.
Like, are we rocking it? Or is it just this group?
Yeah, that's
Let me just answer, Barb. I have to plead ignorance. I can see the graphs in my mind, but I'm just so reluctant to make it up. I'm not sure.
Isn't it also?
I can send a link though. I'll send a link to Rebecca and see if I can answer that.
Isn't it also a spectrum? So you're not necessarily, you can be towards the center of any quadrant.
Right. Yeah. Exactly, and that's part of the problem, right? That these aren't baskets in the sense that once you're in a basket, you're in there, right? You can be much more radically hierarchical, and someone can be just a little bit hierarchical, and that's the thing, right? Like it's the people who are a little bit closer. Those are the people we want to reach. Those are the people, and Oh my God, let me tell you, they are trying to do the same thing. The reason I was looking at the Heartland Institute is because in the Heartland Institute, they're using this research. And they're saying, I wish I could show you this. It made me feel so bad. I was like instantly depressed. I had to go take a walk. I had to quit working. It was a Heartlander saying, okay, so what you gotta do is appeal to their worldview. So what do communitarian egalitarians believe in? They believe in social justice issues. So what you need to do is to show them that climate change actually undermines social justice issues that they hold dear to their heart. So you gotta frame it like this. People in the Sahel are dying today. And why should we put the well-being of people 50 or 100 years from now ahead of the well-being of poor, starving children in the Sahel today? That's not fair. He says if you say it like that, they're gonna come on board. So they're using it, and they're using it, they're weaponizing it. Whereas I'm saying, can we treat this as a tool for rational human discourse? Yeah.
Humanitarian intervention.
Well, as far as media, I mean, that's what I teach on media studies, is that there's research that shows that US and European, for example, a study about France, their media coverage is framed totally different around climate change, and that in Europe, the assumption is it exists, and then it's about what do you do about it. In the US, it's about it's more of a environmental kind of humanitarian whatever, and in the US, it's framed as a political issue, and that because of the formulas of journalism, you gotta show both sides. It can be like, you have 97 or 99% of the scientists do this, but you find that one. So an article's written in terms of both sides, when really one side is so pathetic and weak. But then then it's framed as a political issue. So people are stuck in this thing of does it even exist? Whereas in, for example, this study in France and many other, I think, European countries, it's been framed in a very different way. The assumption is it exists, and then
And a human cause.
Remarkable. Well, I'm astonished that the climate accord in Paris, Peter Sautel pointed this out. It was by consensus of all the countries, and they agreed that it's real, climate change is real, it's human caused, and we need to act. And that's astonishing to me that there was consensus on those three points.
That just proves that it's a one government global conspiracy.
Exactly.
It's a communitarian effort!
Right.
Oh my goodness,
It's being run by, that's exactly the response. I mean, I think that's what they said in this PowerPoint presentation that I was watching at the Heartland Institute.
wow.
I have a comment. I learned over time as an educator in nutrition that I couldn't make any changes with anybody unless I knew where they started from. And that I knew where they were that day. So, their issue might have been housing that day, so they couldn't talk to me about nutrition that day. So I feel that climate change is the same thing. You have to recognize and not antagonize and be respectful of that person at that moment, that day. Because they may just say something off the cuff about an article when something else atrocious has happened that they don't want to talk about. And so you leap in response to what they've said that triggers you instead of reflecting on how you can say something that might be helpful for everybody.
Thank you for that principle of good communication. I think that's really the goal. I think the goal is not to win. Right? I mean, at the Heartland Institute, they're trying to win, right? And they're really trying to sway people to their side. But I think ultimately the goal is to be able to open up some space for real communication. And you can't really be invested in winning. That's not real communication. And I think that there's a affinity between what you've said and maybe what this research is suggesting. That there is this kind of first step, and the first step has to be something around an attitude of respect and openness for where the other person is coming from, where they're starting, and that's super hard. But with climate change, very urgent issue, an issue on which the choir is not enough. It's not enough to get us there. That, you know, if your work is in that issue, that's, you know, that we have to go beyond the choir. We have to talk to people who don't share our worldview, and that's we're pressing that quick. And start with the people in our own world, in our own life. Be brave there, because you have a lot of influence with those folks. So thank you so much, you guys.